Look at that limp. She won't even make it through the night. The sneers rolled through the ranks, a chorus of doubt wrapped in laughter. Raine Whitlock heard every syllable, yet her face betrayed nothing. She only adjusted her pack, steadied her breath, and kept moving, each uneven step a silent act of defiance. They said she wouldn't last a day. Yet on the final stretch of a 72-mile march, Raine kept moving, her leg bleeding, the long scars of past surgeries finally revealed. One by one, the men who mocked her fell behind. She alone pressed on. What they never imagined was that this wasn't the first time she had carried the impossible, and what followed would leave even her commanders in stunned silence. The first days of selection were always brutal, but for Raine Whitlock, they were something else entirely. From the moment she stepped onto the training field at Fort Benning, she could feel eyes cutting into her. Whispers carried across the lines of recruits, low enough to avoid the instructor's attention, but sharp enough to reach her ears. "Look at that limp," one voice muttered. "She won't make it past the first run," another chuckled. Raine heard it all, but her expression never changed. She stood as straight as her body allowed, shoulders squared, jaw locked tight, eyes fixed ahead. She knew the rules here. Weakness wasn't hidden, it was magnified, and her uneven gait, that small but undeniable hitch in her step, was like blood in the water. From the very first 5-mile run, the whispers turned into laughter. Raine fell into the back quarter of the formation, her limp dragging her just behind the pack. Dust rose in plumes as the stronger candidates surged forward, eager to prove themselves. The Georgia air was thick and heavy, sticking to lungs and weighing down every stride. At the checkpoint, Staff Sergeant Alvarez kept time. His voice was neutral, professional, but his eyes flickered with curiosity when Raine came through just above the cutoff. She bent over slightly, hands on hips, drawing in steady breaths while others collapsed or retched into the grass. She wasn't fast, she wasn't flashy, but she didn't break. Still, the comments followed her back to the barracks like shadows. That night, as the men joked on the other side of the thin dividing wall, she sat in silence, methodically laying out her gear. Boots cleaned, rucksack squared away, canteen refilled. The other two women in the female barracks exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to approach her. Lieutenant Pierce's voice carried through the wall, smug and loud. $20 says Whitlock's gone by morning PT. That leg won't hold up." Laughter followed, raw, careless, almost gleeful. The words dug deep, but Raine didn't let it show. She kept her hands steady, folding a shirt with military precision, as if each crease were a small act of defiance. When the lights finally dimmed and the room fell into uneasy quiet, she reached into her rucksack and pulled out a small waterproof pouch. Inside was a photograph, faded, edges worn by time. It showed her standing in desert camouflage, arms slung around another soldier whose face was half hidden in shadow. For a moment, the corners of her mouth softened. Then she tucked it away and rolled up her pant leg. The scars glistened faintly under the dim barracks light, jagged ridges running the length of her thigh, the map of battles no one here had seen. She rubbed medicated cream over them with practiced hands, the motion slow and deliberate. Pain flared with every touch, but it was an old pain, familiar enough to feel like an unwelcome companion rather than an enemy. She taped the leg carefully, layer by layer, then let the pant leg fall back into place. By morning, no one would know. The next day brought the obstacle course. Mud pits, walls, ropes, the arena where physical prowess was meant to shine. For most candidates, it was exhilarating. For Raine, it was a test of endurance and control. Each wall was harder for her, each rope climbed slower, each landing from a jump sharper against her bad leg. And still, she refused to quit. When Sergeant Maddox, broad-shouldered and brimming with arrogance, passed out the radio packs for a team exercise, he made a point of handing the heaviest to Raine. The weight nearly pulled her shoulder down as she adjusted the straps, but she didn't complain. "Just evening the playing field," Maddox said with a smirk. Raine gave him nothing. No glare, no words. Not even the satisfaction of a sigh. She simply shifted her stance, balanced the extra weight, and stepped into formation. That silence was her weapon. Every ounce of struggle was buried under discipline, and though her limp grew sharper, her pace never faltered. Pierce watched her, still amused. "Clock's ticking," he whispered to another candidate. "She'll be gone by sunset." But sunset came, and Raine was still there. Bruised, covered in mud, slower than most, but still standing. In the barracks that evening, the routine repeated. Laughter spilled from the men's side of the wall. Jokes about affirmative action projects and the walking wounded. She ignored them. She always ignored them. Instead, she unrolled her pant leg again, applied the cream to her scars, and whispered quietly to herself. A ritual, a reminder, a promise. You've carried worse. You'll carry this too. Day after day, the pattern held. She finished every run, every drill, every course, not first, not even near the middle, but never failing the standard. Maddox tried again to break her with heavier gear. Pierce doubled down on his bets, telling anyone who would listen that she was a liability, a mistake. But Raine endured. She endured the whispers. She endured the weight. She endured the pain. And as the days passed, something subtle began to shift. The laughter didn't stop, but it no longer sounded so certain. A few candidates started watching her out of the corners of their eyes, as if wondering how long sheer will could possibly carry someone. Raine didn't wonder. She already knew. The Georgia heat hadn't let up. By the second week of selection, sweat was constant, hunger was gnawing, and every candidate carried the kind of fatigue that settled into bone. That was the point. Selection wasn't just about muscle or speed. It was about seeing who could endure, who could think when the body begged to collapse. And it was during the land navigation exercise that Raine Whitlock stopped being the candidate everyone dismissed and became the candidate no one could quite figure out. They were dropped in scattered positions with nothing but a map, compass, and time limit. The terrain was unforgiving. Dense pine forests, swamps buzzing with insects, ridges that cut like knife edges against the horizon. Candidates were expected to locate a series of points, mark them accurately, and return within the allotted time. Most charged headlong, sprinting through the woods, eager to impress with speed. Raine didn't. She moved with calculated precision, compass steady in her hand, eyes flicking between the terrain and the map. Her limp forced her to conserve energy, but instead of being a handicap, it made her efficient. Where others fought through thickets or scaled needless inclines, she plotted routes that skirted obstacles, conserving her strength and time. Hours later, as candidates stumbled back to the checkpoint, mud-soaked, scratched, panting, Raine appeared with all her points marked. She wasn't first, but her accuracy was flawless. She handed in her card to Staff Sergeant Alvarez, who looked down at the sheet, then up at her. "Efficient work," he said, his tone measured. "Thank you, Sergeant," she replied simply. Alvarez watched her for a moment longer, his eyes narrowing with something like recognition. It wasn't just that she'd passed. It was how she'd done it, with a kind of quiet expertise that spoke of more than just training camp drills. He'd seen this kind of work before, in people who had learned to move with purpose because a wrong turn in their world didn't mean a lost point. It meant death. Later that evening, during survival skills testing, Raine revealed even more. While others struggled to build shelters or spark fires with flint, she moved with practiced ease. She chose a location shielded from the wind, built a lean-to with perfect angles for runoff, and layered pine boughs thick enough to insulate against the creeping cold. She started her fire low and controlled, smoke barely visible. Alvarez stopped at her station, crouching down. "That's not textbook. Where'd you learn that?" Raine's answer was calm, almost too casual. "Survival school, plus some adaptations." He studied her face, searching for cracks, but her expression was unreadable. She might as well have been carved from stone. That night, Alvarez reported his observations to Captain Marcus Hale during the cadre debrief. Most of the talk was routine. Who had quit? Who had excelled? Who was hanging on by a thread? But when Raine's name came up, Alvarez's voice shifted. "She's different," he said. "Not the strongest, not the fastest, but tactically, smarter than most. And those survival techniques, she's not learning them here for the first time." Hale leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He'd noticed Whitlock too, not just her performance, but the way she carried herself. as if she'd already lived through something far harsher than any obstacle course they could build. Curious, he pulled her file again. And there it was, the redactions. Whole sections of her service record blacked out, like someone had taken a thick marker to history itself. Deployments listed only as classified, medical records referencing multiple surgeries but without details. A commendation for Valor, but no citation attached. Hale had been in this business long enough to know what that meant. There was a story buried here, one the Army, or perhaps someone higher, didn't want seen. He picked up the phone, dialing an old contact at Special Operations Command. "Jim, it's Hale. I've got a candidate, Sergeant Raine Whitlock. Files sealed, tighter than anything I've seen in years. What am I dealing with?" There was silence on the other end, then a low, deliberate reply. "If her name came across your desk, Marcus, don't dig too deep. Some things are classified for a reason." Hale pressed. "She's limping her way through my selection course. Half my cadre thinks she's a liability. But she's still here. And she's not just here. She's performing in ways that don't make sense with her file." Another pause, then, "All I can say is, if she's there, it's because someone, somewhere, decided she earned the right to be." Hale hung up, unsettled. He stared at the redacted pages spread across his desk, the black ink swallowing whatever truth lay beneath. He thought of her face during the day's exercises. Composed, focused, not a flicker of complaint. Soldiers like that didn't just appear. They were forged, often in places no report would ever document. The next morning, when Hale stood before the formation, his eyes lingered on Raine longer than the others. She stood at rigid attention, limp barely noticeable as she braced herself. To everyone else, she was the misfit, the one destined to fail. But Hale knew better now. He didn't know her story, not yet, but he knew enough to understand this. Raine Whitlock wasn't fighting to prove she belonged. She was proving something else entirely. And somewhere, buried in those classified lines, was the reason why. The third week of selection was infamous for one thing: the Crucible March. 72 miles of unforgiving terrain, a rucksack loaded with 80 pounds of gear, and checkpoints that allowed no mercy. Most candidates approached it with grim determination, their nerves stretched taut as bowstrings. For Raine Whitlock, it was another battlefield. Different weapons, same rules. Survive, endure, outlast. The storm rolled in before dawn, clouds blackening the sky, thunder groaning across the mountains. Rain lashed against the earth, turning the dirt trail into a sucking mire of mud. Each step was a test. Boots sank and slid. Packs pulled shoulders down. Wind howled through the trees. Some candidates cursed under their breath. Others simply lowered their heads and pushed forward. But already by mile 10, the formation was scattering. Lieutenant Carver, tall and broad-shouldered, surged ahead. His reputation preceded him. A runner of ultramarathons, a man who had bragged about finishing mountain races for fun. He moved like he was born for the terrain, arms pumping, boots finding purchase even on the slickest climbs. For hours, his figure remained a distant beacon at the front, a reminder to everyone else of how far behind they were. But Raine Whitlock didn't chase him. She didn't sprint, didn't burn through reserves. She settled into her rhythm, one step, then another, her limp a steady counterpoint to the storm. Some stumbled past her in the first miles, throwing mocking glances as if to say, "You won't last." Yet as the miles stretched on, their speed faltered. Raine's pace never did. By mile 20, the rain had turned from nuisance to torment. The trail was a river of mud, sucking at boots, swallowing energy. Carver still led, though his movements had grown heavier, his breath rasping louder. Raine, caked in mud from head to toe, emerged from the tree line at checkpoint 3. Her eyes were clear, her breathing controlled. She refilled her canteen, tore open a protein bar, and continued without resting. Staff Sergeant Alvarez watched her go, shaking his head. "She's gaining," he murmured to Captain Hale. Hale followed her figure with narrowed eyes. He didn't say it aloud, but he could feel it too. Something was unfolding here, something no one had expected. By mile 40, the storm reached its peak. Sheets of rain hammered the mountain pass. Wind howled like a living thing. Candidates dropped one by one, muscles cramping, hypothermia creeping in through soaked uniforms. Medics rushed to evacuate the fallen. At checkpoint 5, only 12 remained. Carver was still ahead, but the gap had closed. And then came the injury. It happened on a steep incline, slick with mud and hidden roots. Raine slipped, catching herself on one knee, and when she rose again, blood seeped through the fabric of her left pant leg. At first, she ignored it. Pain was nothing new. But as the wound worsened, the crimson stain spread, dark against the soaked camouflage. At checkpoint 6, a medic stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Hold up, Sergeant. That leg needs checking." "I can keep moving," Raine said flatly. "Protocol," the medic insisted, already kneeling. He pulled scissors from his kit and sliced the fabric open to access the wound. What he revealed froze him in place. The fresh gash was ugly enough, but beneath it lay something far more shocking. Thick ridges of scar tissue, the kind only catastrophic trauma left behind. Faded surgical lines traced the length of her thigh. Metal pins glimmered faintly beneath the skin, where reconstruction had once held shattered bone together. The medic's hands faltered. Around them, other candidates stopped, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten as they stared. Whispers spread, then silence. Staff Sergeant Alvarez, who had been trailing nearby, crouched down, his eyes widening. "Those scars, I've seen something like that before. Firebase Elysium 3 years ago." Raine's expression didn't change. Her breathing was steady, her jaw set. She pulled her leg back, wrapped the field dressing herself, and adjusted her rucksack. "I'm cleared." The medic hesitated, then nodded. "If you can keep moving." Without another word, Raine pushed back onto the trail. The limp was more pronounced now, every step dragging blood and memory behind it, but her pace never faltered. By mile 50, Carver's once commanding lead was crumbling. His stride had deteriorated into a stagger, his powerful frame betraying exhaustion. He looked back only once, and what he saw shook him. Raine Whitlock, mud-streaked, bloodied, scarred, was closing the distance. Her eyes locked forward, unyielding. Mile 60. Only 9 candidates remained. Carver stumbled into checkpoint 8, gasping for air, and minutes later Raine appeared right behind him, her limp sharper than ever, but her expression still composed. She refilled her canteen, nodded at Alvarez, and kept going. The storm finally broke near dawn, the clouds parting to reveal a bruised sky streaked with gold. The trail ahead climbed steep switchbacks, the final ascent before the long descent to the finish. Carver clawed his way upward, his body screaming with each step. He collapsed once, pushed himself up, and collapsed again. Raine came next. Her uniform was torn, her face pale, her leg bandaged and soaked with blood. And still she climbed. Not fast, not graceful, but relentless. The instructors at the ridge watched in silence, rainwater dripping from their caps. They had seen endurance before. They had seen strength. But what Raine carried in those scars, what she carried in each uneven step, was something beyond either. When she crested the ridge, passing Carver's crumpled form as medics rushed to him, there was no cheer, no sound at all. Only the storm's fading echoes, and the sight of Raine Whitlock pressing forward, scarred leg exposed, proving that what was broken could still endure, could still triumph. And in that moment, every commander watching knew this was no ordinary candidate. The memory returned not as a whisper, but as a flood. The sight of Raine's scarred leg had unlocked something Staff Sergeant Alvarez thought he had buried years ago. Firebase Elysium, Eastern Afghanistan. A desolate outpost clinging to a ridgeline never meant to be permanent, but forced into permanence by necessity. The attack came at dawn. Mortar fire rained down first, collapsing sandbag walls and ripping through the few defensive positions they had. Then came the fighters, swarming in from multiple directions. Radio calls for support went unanswered. They were too far, too exposed. Alvarez, then just a specialist, remembered the terror. Ammunition dwindled, casualties mounting, voices screaming over the crackle of comms. Hours passed like years. When someone shouted that a rescue team had been launched, no one believed it. The skies were a storm of gunfire and smoke. No pilot would be mad enough to fly into that. And yet they came. The thrum of rotor blades rose above the chaos, slicing through smoke and fear alike. A Black Hawk appeared low, weaving through tracer fire, bullets sparking against its frame. It hovered dangerously above the extraction zone, its tail rocking with every impact. A pararescue jumper fast roped down, compact frame, helmet tight, rifle slung across her chest. She moved fast, efficient, barking orders with a clarity that cut through the panic. Wounded first! Line them up! Alvarez felt her hands on him before he saw her face. Quick, clinical, assessing the bullet wound in his leg. Femur shattered. Priority 1. Her voice was calm, precise, as if the battlefield itself bent to her discipline. She secured a tourniquet, dragged him to the line, then turned and fired suppressive bursts to keep the enemy at bay. For minutes that felt eternal. She ferried bodies. 2 men slung over her shoulders at once, blood soaking her fatigues. The helicopter took fire again, the tail rotor shuddering, alarms screaming in its cockpit. And then disaster. A rocket slammed into its rear, spinning the craft violently. It clipped the ridge, crashed in a plume of dirt and flame 2 miles out. Alvarez blacked out. When he woke, he lay in the wreckage, pain roaring through his leg. The pilot was dead, the co-pilot barely conscious. And there she was, the same compact figure, her own leg torn open by shrapnel, blood pooling around her. She should have been unconscious. She should have been done. But instead she was moving, crawling through the wreckage to pull survivors clear. Stay with me, she told him, voice steel over tremors. She carried Alvarez first, then another man, slinging them over her back despite the bone jutting beneath her own skin. 4 miles of hostile ground stretched between the wreck and friendly lines. 4 miles of jagged rock, enemy patrols, and constant threat of death. She never stopped. Every 100 yards she adjusted Alvarez, tightened the tourniquet, gave him morphine, whispered words he barely heard but felt nonetheless. You'll make it. You'll go home. When gunfire echoed, she dragged them into cover, returning fire with deadly precision before lifting them again. Step by agonizing step, she carried the impossible. By the time they stumbled into the safety of a friendly checkpoint, Alvarez had faded in and out of consciousness so many times, he wasn't sure what was real. But one image burned into memory, her face, mud, blood, pain carved into every line, yet unbroken. And then she was gone. The mission was classified. Survivors were separated, debriefed under silence orders. Alvarez searched for her name afterward, but every file was redacted, every inquiry blocked. She became a ghost, a rumor, a question he could never answer. Until now. Standing at the Crucible March checkpoint, watching Raine adjust her rucksack with that same calm defiance, Alvarez felt his chest tighten. The scars, the limp, the silence, it all aligned. He stepped closer, voice low, almost reverent. Firebase Elysium, 3 years ago. That was you. For the first time, Raine's composure flickered, just slightly. Her eyes met his, steady but tired, and she said only, "That's classified, Sergeant." But Alvarez didn't need confirmation. He already knew. The woman limping her way through this course, the one everyone mocked, the one he'd quietly defended, was the same soldier who had carried him through hell with a shattered leg of her own. And the realization struck him harder than any storm, harder than any march. Raine Whitlock wasn't here to prove herself to them. She had already proven herself long ago. The final stretch of the Crucible March was a place where even the strongest had broken before. The last miles twisted down a jagged descent, slick with rain and shadowed by trees. Each candidate who had reached this point in past years arrived half-conscious, stumbling, collapsing across the finish line in desperate relief. But on this morning, it was different. The storm had lifted just enough for pale dawn light to break across the horizon. Fog clung low over the valley, masking the dirt road that led to the finish. The instructors waited in silence, stopwatches in hand, eyes fixed on the bend in the trail. Captain Marcus Hale stood apart, clipboard forgotten at his side. Beside him, Master Sergeant Rourke crossed his arms, the perpetual skeptic. They weren't expecting anyone for hours. Then came the sound. Boots, steady, rhythmic, unhurried. Out of the mist emerged a solitary figure. Mud streaked across her uniform, Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead, and her left leg, bound in a blood-soaked bandage, dragged just slightly with every step. Yet her posture was upright, her rucksack still balanced squarely across her back. She wasn't staggering. She wasn't crawling. She was walking. "Whitlock," Rourke muttered, disbelief thick in his voice. The instructors froze. Every pair of eyes locked on her as she crossed the final yards, head held high, face composed. And then without drama, without celebration, she stepped across the line. The stopwatch clicked. Hale glanced down, his jaw tightening. 63 hour, he said quietly. She broke the record by 5. Silence answered him. Not a cheer, not even a whisper. The only sound was Raine herself as she lowered her rucksack, methodically unclipping the straps and setting it down with care. She straightened slowly, spine stiff, and stood at attention. There was no fist pump, no grin of victory. Her breathing was heavy but controlled, her eyes scanning forward as if she were still on mission. She had endured 72 miles of hell, and now that it was done, she simply stood, scarred leg trembling slightly beneath her, yet unbowed. One of the medics stepped forward, voice tentative. "Sergeant, let's check you out." "I'm fine," Raine said firmly, though her voice was roughened by exhaustion. The medic hesitated, but Hale raised a hand. "Give her a moment." Rourke finally found his voice, low and grudging. "I said she wouldn't last the week." Hale didn't look at him. His gaze never left Raine. "We were all wrong." Minutes passed before another candidate appeared on the trail, staggering, supported by medics half the way. Behind him, 2 more stumbled in, collapsing as soon as they crossed. By then, Raine had already rehydrated, adjusted her bandage, and repacked her gear. She wasn't resting. She wasn't waiting. She was preparing. It unsettled them, because in that silence, her refusal to celebrate, her refusal to show anything but quiet readiness, was a kind of power none of them could ignore. Alvarez arrived at the finish soon after, his eyes wide, searching for her. When he found Raine standing calmly near the medics, he stopped, chest heaving. Their gazes met, and in that unspoken exchange, history bridged itself. He remembered her carrying him through fire, and now he had seen her carry herself through this. But the weight of the moment wasn't only his. Captain Hale stepped forward, clipboard still forgotten in his hand. He studied her, searching for some trace of weakness, something to explain what he had just witnessed. But there was nothing, only the scars, the mud, and the unshakable will in her stance. "You realize what you've done," Hale said at last, his voice level but softer than usual. Raine's response was simple. "Met the standard, sir." "Met the standard?" Rourke barked, unable to contain himself. "You shattered it." Raine didn't flinch. "Standards are the only thing that matter. I didn't come here to impress anyone." For the first time, Rourke had no reply. He stood there, arms falling to his sides, his skepticism stripped away. The other instructors exchanged glances, unsure how to process what they were seeing. Most finishers collapsed. Some cried. A few saluted in shaky pride. But Raine Whitlock, she simply existed in that space like the storm itself, a fact of nature that could neither be ignored nor explained. One by one, candidates limped across the finish. Each found Raine already recovered, already focused. She helped organize water, passed out rations, adjusted gear for those who couldn't. There was no arrogance, no declaration of victory, only steady hands and quiet endurance. And that, more than anything, forced everyone else to confront the truth. This woman they had mocked, doubted, and dismissed had not just survived their test, she had owned it. When the cadre regrouped at the end of the day, Hale closed his folder without reading. "Gentlemen," he said, "I think we all just witnessed something we'll be talking about for the rest of our careers." Rourke exhaled, long and heavy. "She isn't what I thought she was." "No," Hale agreed, his eyes drifting back toward the field where Raine still stood. "She's more." And in that moment, the skepticism, the doubt, the ridicule, all of it dissolved into silence. Not the silence of dismissal, but the silence of respect. The parade ground was quiet, the kind of quiet that carried weight. Weeks of pain, attrition, and endurance had narrowed the candidates from 58 to just 8. They stood in crisp dress uniforms now, boots polished, faces weathered by hardship, each bearing the marks of survival. At the podium, Captain Marcus Hale surveyed them with steady eyes. Behind him sat the cadre of instructors, even Master Sergeant Rourke, uncharacteristically solemn. Families and a handful of dignitaries filled the small bleachers, their applause polite but subdued. This ceremony wasn't about spectacle, it was about recognition. When Hale began to speak, his voice carried across the field with deliberate gravity. Selection is not designed to celebrate, it is designed to reveal, to strip away everything except the truth of who a soldier is when nothing else is left. These 8 before you, against every obstacle, proved they belong among the best. He paused, letting his gaze fall on Raine Whitlock. She stood at attention, her uniform pressed perfectly, but her limp faintly visible even now. To the casual observer, she looked calm. To those who had marched beside her, the sight carried something closer to awe. Hale cleared his throat and held up a folder marked classified. Murmurs rippled through the instructors. Some truths, however, remained hidden too long. 3 years ago, during an attack on Firebase Elysium, a para-rescue sergeant carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire after her extraction bird went down. Despite sustaining a catastrophic leg injury herself, she evacuated 2 men across 4 miles of hostile terrain. 4 lives were saved that day. She was recommended for the Silver Star, but the mission was sealed, the recognition delayed. He turned, facing Raine directly. That soldier stands before us today, Sergeant Raine Whitlock. For a moment, silence gripped the field. Then slowly, one by one, every instructor, including Rourke, snapped to attention and raised their hands in salute. The gesture was not perfunctory, it was reverent, heavy with the weight of respect earned the hard way. Raine returned the salute, expression steady, though her eyes glistened faintly in the morning sun. After the ceremony, candidates and families approached her. Lieutenant Pierce, the man who had once mocked her limp the loudest, lingered awkwardly before finally speaking. I owe you an apology. I judged you without knowing. Raine studied him, then let the faintest smile curve her lips. Learn from it. Pierce nodded, chastened, his arrogance stripped away. Finally, Staff Sergeant Alvarez stepped forward with his wife and 2 children. His voice caught as he introduced Raine. This is the woman I told you about, the one who carried me when I couldn't walk. His wife embraced Raine tightly. We owe you everything, she whispered. Raine's reply was simple, quiet but firm. You would have done the same. As the sun rose higher, the graduates dispersed, each moving toward their futures. But on that field, one truth remained clear. Raine Whitlock had not just earned her place. She had redefined what strength meant, leaving behind not a roar, but a silence that spoke louder than any cheer. In many ways, Raine Whitlock's story isn't just about a soldier. It's about life itself. We live in a world that often measures people by appearances, by what seems broken, slow, or imperfect. Yet her journey reminds us that resilience isn't about looking the strongest, but about refusing to quit when the odds are stacked against you. Think about our daily lives today, in the workplace, in our communities, even within families. How often are people dismissed because of age, injury, or circumstance, only to prove, when tested, that they carry a strength others overlooked? In American culture, we value grit, perseverance, and the courage to stand tall even when others doubt us. Raine embodied all of those, not with words, but with action. But let me ask you this. What would you have done if you were in her place, mocked, doubted, and scarred? Would you have kept marching, or would you have walked away? That's a question worth debating. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Share your experiences of being underestimated and what you learn. Thank you for staying with us through this story. If it inspired you, please like this video, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.